What is the best rumor you have ever heard about yourself? Man, when I was in high school there was this kid we'll call Maca. He was a straight up dick all the time. But he never touched me. He always just used words. Liked to talk a lot of shit about me, as much as possible, it seemed. He started rumors about me all the time. And the weird thing was, I never really understood why. Like I had never done anything to this dude point anyway. In 10th grade, my mother, my sister, and I went on vacation to Virginia and we were gone for like a week. When I came back everyone was keeping their distance and making weird faces at me when I walked by. My best friend came up to me and was like, Maca told everyone your family all got body lice and you had to be out of school for a week while you were getting rid of it. I tried to shake it off and not worry about it, but it was really fucking bothering me. That day after school I was waiting on my ride and Maca was also waiting on his ride. So I confronted him in front of like 15 other people and asked him why he was always talking shit and spreading lies. He tried to act tough a couple of times, but I wouldn't back down and told him, basically in so many words, that this was going to be a fight and that we were past the point of talking. And that bussy little beach ran from me point, and so a new rumor got started that Maca was a beach. Only that rumor was true. And then he later got kicked out of school for selling pills to people. So I feel like everything worked out in the end. That I was in a drugs gang and moved away from a city because of rival gangs. I moved from London out to the countryside when I was 14 to 15 because my family hated the city. Just before we moved one of my close friends was murdered by a gang that thought he was somebody else. He was completely innocent. It was just a case of mistaken identity. There was a picture online of him, me, and a few other friends. Someone at my new school saw this picture and assumed because my friends were all tough looking black guys they must have been in a gang, and I was friends with a guy that just got murdered in gang related activity. People thought I was a badass, and so many of the popular kids wanted to be my friend because they thought I dealt coke. The funniest interaction was a guy shouted something at me and I just told him to fuck off and walked away. He's twice my size and could easily kick me ass and starts wanting to fight, but his friends quickly step in and say how he should be scared because I know people that would fuck him up. All of this wore off once they actually spoke to me and realized I was just another nerdy kid that happened to be friends with tough looking people, one of which was murdered. Basically people from the countryside were scared of black people and anyone that is friends with them. Similar thing here. A little backstory, I competed in a robotics competition while in high school. I did a lot of electrical/programming work for our team. Carried a small pocket knife, think cheap keychain Swiss Army knife, to the after school meetings at a local, off-campus, workshop for stripping wires. So one random day of my final semester senior year, I get called up to the principal's office. It was while heading there that I realized I had my pocket knife from the night before when working on the robot. At this point I'm freaking out as our school district had a zero tolerance policy. To compound things further, a fellow robotics student had been questioned earlier in the day due to some complaints from other students about him having bomb making materials which turned out to be printouts of how to do thermite reactions. When he was questioned, my name came up because of a conversation we had regarding an episode of Mythbusters where they blow up I saw something using thermite. Anyhow, I immediately fess up to having my knife hoping full disclosure will help. It didn't and end up getting expelled and having criminal charges pressed against me. Cue the lawyers. Criminal charges get dropped and the school agrees to allow me to graduate early as though nothing ever happened to avoid the publicity as the other student didn't even get a suspension. Fast forward a few years and the topic comes up between my wife. We went to the same middle and high schools and she told me that the rumor was I actually had a bomb with me at school and that I was expelled because of it. Nothing was ever mentioned about the other guy, oddly enough. True story, I had a fake buddy years back in Austin, TX. We will call her Hux. She was 100% liberated sexually. We would have all kinds of sex, usually late night after my long shift, and after she was done riding bikes with friends. I would insist on rinsing myself off, and she would usually do the same. I'm not sure if I mentioned this already, but we would have all kinds of sech, often exhausting, so afterwards I would cook. Usually some kind of sandwich. Grilled PBJs with molasses, turkey bacon BLTs, and grilled blue cheeses, to name a few. She was a member of a local punk cycling family, is the best way to describe it. I sold drugs around town, mostly weed hallucinogens from my bicycle coincidentally. As we got closer I became part of her social circle. Of course she introduced me as the guy I'm faking who has that dang weed. On my own social accord, notwithstanding my narcotics, I became a valuable and reputable member of the gang. Well, our time together was short-lived. When the leader of the gang became single, she/him became exclusive. She informed me of this decision after the last time we had sex. So here I am. I gained a wonderful group of friends, but lost my most functional fat buddy ever. After a party I was drunk and lonely, so I headed home to jerk off and go to sleep. As I'm leaving I see a female who was at the party waiting by the curb of the driveway, and as I passed her to ride towards my house she joins me. She is going that way anyway. She keeps talking about how she has no weed at home and all she wants is to get high before she goes to bed, so I offered to sell her some weed. When she gets to my house I go to my kitchen to process her order and she goes to the bathroom, but I hear my shower running. She's taking a shower. She comes out of the shower soaking wet, and I hope you know the rest. An hour or so later she asked me what kind of sandwich am I going to make. I gave her the most puzzled look. She says this: Hux is always talking about you. He likes them dirty but clean. Good weed, good dick, and he makes after sex sandwiches. This is actually an amazing story, well worth the read, and I only heard it a couple of days ago, so it's weird that I've just seen this thread, so I'm talking to this girl who I went to primary school with. I haven't seen or spoke to her in 10 or so years, but we found each other recently over social media. Call her B. It's worth mentioning I was born in Africa then moved to the U.K, where I grew up. Point B told me a couple days ago that there was a rumor at primary school that I once got chased by a rhino. I was mixed race in a predominantly white school so there was loads of excitement when I got there, but I never heard rumors. I find this hilarious because I'm fast, but obviously I can't outrun a faking rhino, so I go and tell my mum. Mum looks at me and laughs. She says you didn't get chased by a rhino as a child, but I did. Then she tells me this story of when she was a little girl, living in the bush in Tanzania. Her dad, my granddad, was a station master. There was only one train track, and one train passed a day. She was playing, and then she heard screams. Men came running by, shouting Vifaru, Kimbia, equals rhino, run. So mum starts running and everyone splits. The rhino is confused and switching targets. Then she remembers her dad telling her, large animals are afraid of anything larger, faster, that makes more noise etc. A train. So she runs over to the tracks near her dad's station as fast as she can and crosses them, then turns to look behind her. The rhino is snorting and stamping its hooves and kicking up dust on the overside of the tracks, but it won't cross. She escaped near certain death. I'd never heard this story before 2 days ago, because I'd never heard the rumor about me being chased by a rhino. It's likely that years and years ago, my mum tried to tell someone at my primary school her story, and either due to English being her second language someone misunderstood her and thought she was talking about me, or some kid overhead and bent the truth. But yeah, that's the best rumor I've heard about myself, which actually turned out to be the truth. And not about me at all. My mum is a genius. If she panicked and didn't think of the tracks no one would be alive to tell the tale. Point. She also has loads of other stories of dangerous animal encounters from when she grew up that she told me after. Moral here guys is talk to your parents more. I had no idea my mum was such a faking badass. Oh, I got 1 point back during my freshman year of high school, an all-boys private school. There was a relatively brief period for about a month or so where I had this misplaced reputation of being a hardcore badass. For context, I'm not and never have been a particularly big guy. I'm rather short at only 5'7" or 5'8", and while I worked out and exercised a lot in high school and played sports, I was never the bulky type in the slightest. Point. So, one morning after I had been dropped off at school, I went to my locker as usual. The guy who had a locker near me walked by, and we struck up a conversation about a basketball game we both watched the previous night. In the middle of our conversation, this other kid who had a locker between us just interjects loudly and starts trying to talk to the guy right as I'm in the middle of a sentence. More context is probably necessary for this. Just a few days prior, I had lost both of my dogs who I had grown up with. They were old, and we had to put them down, and being only 15 years old, I was still getting over it, and for a couple of weeks at least, rarely cracked a smile. I was typically in a pretty bad mood most of the time. Further, this kid who interjected was not exactly the most pleasant guy to be around. He was pretty dweeby, which is fine, but he was also one of those socially awkward and inept people who don't realize how awkward and inept they are, so they are loud and don't recognize when they are being rude or inappropriate or just flat out weird, making everyone feel uncomfortable almost every time they speak. I mean, I never had a problem with him personally and was always friendly to him, but it was almost like he actively tried to get on your nerves, if that makes sense. After this kid interjects, my patience started reaching its limit. Doesn't help that I've never been a morning person. Since he cut me off mid-conversation and the guy I was talking to was clearly just as annoyed about his interruption as I was, I spoke up and said, "Hey, thanks for interrupting us, asshole. You mind shutting the fuck up for 2 seconds?" I was kneeling down, as I had a bottomed locker. Saying that pissed the kid off, unsurprisingly, so in response, he turned to face me and then faking slapped me across my left cheek. Big mistake. I was in no mood. Like I said, I was never a bulky or big guy, and have never been a fighter. That said, I did stay in shape, and was an athlete, and this kid was about as uncoordinated and out of shape, though not fat, as you can be at 15 years old. After he slapped me, I stared into his faking soul for what felt like hours, absorbing what had just happened. Before I knew what I was doing, I was up on my feet. I grabbed his throat with my left hand, slammed him hard against the lockers, brought my right hand back as far as it could go, then delivered a slap to his face so hard that the sound caused the entire hallway of 200+ male high school students to briefly stop talking for one of those weird collective moments of awkward silence. I raised my hand again, ready to follow up with another slap, when my algebra teacher grabbed me from behind by my shirt and pulled me off of him. He saw the entire interaction, at least, he saw the part where the kid slapped me first. We both went to the principal's office, and thankfully they had cameras in the hallway, so they were at least able to see everything that happened. Again, this was an all-boys private school, so fights between students weren't exactly uncommon, and when they did happen, they were far worse than what we just did. We both got off with a very stern warning and detention, but that wasn't so bad, everything considered. The next day, word of what happened began to spread, and as is usually the case with high school rumors, it had been blown way out of proportion by the time it got back to me. People were saying I chokeslammed this kid against the lockers, then threw him on the ground, and started wailing on his face with my fist. Some people said I banged his face several times against the lockers. Some people were surprised to see me in school the next day, believing I had been suspended or expelled because I broke the other kid's nose or something. For about a month, I couldn't escape the rumors and hearsay. Everyone thought I was a take no shit badass who will chakeslam you and turn your face into a bloody pulp if you just look at me the wrong way. TLDR, annoying kid in high school beach slapped me. Proceeded to throw him against the locker, deliver a slap to his face so hard that his children will feel it. Entire high school blew the whole thing way out of proportion and thought I was some dangerous hair trigger badass for about a month. This'll probably be buried, but the best rumor for me was accidentally started by me because I made a joke. This was during my last year in high school. I made a status on Facebook. Can't remember what it was, but those details are irrelevant, and for some reason, the location indicated that I was making this status from Montreal, Quebec. I live in Newfoundland. Normally I wouldn't question it, or even notice it, but someone commented on my status asking why it said I was in Montreal, so I decided to run with it. I made up some bullshit story about how my parents got in trouble with the law, and I had 5 or 6 people message me about what happened. I just continued with the same story about how I couldn't say much on Facebook, but I had to flee to Montreal and lay low for a bit until things cooled down back home. I then logged off Facebook for the rest of the weekend. Fast forward to Monday morning, and I'm waiting at the bus stop to get to school. The bus pulls up, and I walk onto the bus. No one I regularly hang out with noticed until I sat down, and people were like, "What the fuck? I thought you were in Montreal." I told them how it started, and they all thought it was hilarious. As soon as we get to school, we go to our normal hanging out area where everyone smokes cigarettes and non-cigarettes. Since we are pretty much the first bus to arrive, we wait for the other buses to arrive. As the buses pull up and people start piling out, I hear one of my buddies look over and scream, "You son of a bitch." He ran over and punched me in the arm. TLDR, made a Facebook status and accidentally started a rumor that I'd ran to another province. Had 20 to 30 people convinced that I had to run from the law, only to show up to school the next Monday. There were 2 stories from one event on the same night. I'm UK so important to story. Was about 18 and just left high school about to go to college. Was walking up for a night out when I got into a fight with a group of boys a year below me who had a grudge. I say fight, but was more like name calling from a distance. A couple tried to get physical, but I'm a big bloke, hence the grudge. At 18 I was about 6'1" and roughly 160 lbs. Was working out as well, so nicely stacked back then. Not the towering tub of lard I'm today. The boys were a good head shorter than me and one did try to hit me in the face and clanked me one on the cheek. I gave him a smack back, and they ran after that. A few hours later, after a few at my usual first stop, a bunch of mates were confused as to why I was in the pub. Apparently I'd had my head kicked in. Really? On to the next pub, and when I walked in it was like one of those scenes in the movies where the pool balls stop and the jukebox goes silent and the next line goes, "You ain't from round here, are ya?" That kind of reaction. Because by then I'd been stabbed and rushed to hospital and might die. It was all very hilarious and those cunts never lived it down. Got a few hugs from relieved friends of the fair such from it and helped seal my reputation of being damn near indestructible. Okay, here we go. The story. My best friend's brother got a car, so he would give my brother and I a ride home every day. I told him I'd cheat on it when he first got it, and we continued life. Keep in mind, I never shat in the school restrooms, being that it's an old public school. The day came that I couldn't cork my dickie, so I found him sitting down at his lunch table and let him know the time had come. Fast forward to me crouching on the hood of his car in the parking lot, letting it loose, and wiping a bit with some notebook paper, crumpled up a few times for softness. I'm no savage. The brown bomb slid down his hood a bit, coming awfully close to my shoe, and leaving a mighty nice streak leading from the point of impact to the scene of the crime. The deed was done. There were crowns forming, and word traveled pretty quickly. I think he was approached by the campus police and they knew who'd done it, but nothing happened, because it was all in good fun. He did have to skip last period to hit the car wash, because Texas sun plus 2 equals no good. I bought him some quarter pounders to make it up to him and everything was good. Years later, chatting up with a car walker, we brought up high school, and I mentioned where I graduated from, and the only thing he'd heard about that school was that someone shat on the principal's hood. I guess it's the effect of word traveling getting skewed a little bit with every handoff, but it was certainly amusing to be part of some kind of legend. Sorry if this comes out hard to read. Never made a long post before. TLDR, when I was in high school, I shat on a friend's car for sheets giggles. Years later in the workforce, a co-worker found out what high school I went to, and the only thing he heard about my schoolies, that someone had shat on the principal's car. I'm the anonymous legend. Really long and uninteresting story, but basically I got into a fight with a gay guy at my school, and the rumor mill went into overdrive. 2 theories about the fight prevailed, neither true. Point 1. I was severely homophobic. Some people even extended this to me being a neo-Nazi, and just wanted to disrupt gay people as much as possible too. I was gay. There are 2 subversions of this. 2. The fight was due to some drama that was caused by us both being gay too. B. I was faking the fight to try and hide being gay. All of these persisted for years after. In fact, just a couple of months ago it turned out one of my close friends has always thought I was gay. I assumed due to this rumor and was very surprised to find out this was not the case. The neo-Nazi part was never taken too seriously, but with the people that believed that one, I was considered homophobic for a long time. After, with no additional evidence besides the one incident point, it just goes to show how you never know what's relevant to your life and what isn't. That day I thought it was just a one-off incident at school, but it impacted my life for a time period much longer than that lunch break. This happened not far ago. Last summer I went for a week to Mallorca. I'm Spanish. It's a pretty common thing to do when you finish pre-college studies, because last year is a really hard year here in Spain. There you have all the party and craziness you can imagine. So we go to this island called Mallorca. Maybe Germans know about it. There were more Germans than Spanish, haha. Anyways, by the time I was there I had a girlfriend. We'd been together for like a year. She didn't come and was a bit scared because with all the party and alcohol there is also a lot of sex, and thought that I would fall for it because of the alcohol and the distance. Who was there was her best friend, a guy I hated because he always told shit about me, but I didn't know why and still don't have a clue. So after the week I come home, I go see my GF to find out that she was told by someone that I cheated on her. Apparently I had sex with 8 of the best looking girls in my class and a threesome with 2 random German beauties. Obviously it wasn't true and even hard to believe if you know that the trip lasted 4 days plus 1 plane day and most of the time you were sleeping recovering from the late night parties. Some other PPL heard and believed this, so after I split with my then girlfriend for another reason and months later, I found myself to be a legend among some groups of girls and boys too. My enemy made me a such legend. Still to this day some PPL don't know this isn't true. In high school a girl I had never talked to walked up and said, "So, can I see it?" I had no clue what she was talking about, so I asked what she meant by it. "Your dick. It's like really big, right?" Kinda blindsided me, so I just stammered out what. She rolled her eyes and walked off. Later that day I saw her walking across campus and decided to ask her what that was all about. Apparently she was confusing me with someone else. Oh, okay, as I wander off like a socially inept 16-year-old. In retrospect, I probably should have pulled it out. High school girls are dumb as shit and most of them don't even know what big is. As I found out senior year, I also had someone at a dinner party mistake me for being wealthy. He was a friend of a friend and tagged along, I guess. He looked worn down and broken, kind like Lionel Hutz from The Simpsons. The entire night he kept making these weird remarks. Someone would order a drink and I'd hear him say, "Don't worry, she plugs got it," and other such things. At the time, I was making a little cash as a welder, but not even enough to afford routine maintenance on my beat up truck. At the end of the evening, as I'm telling everyone I'll catch them later, he walks up and asks to speak with me outside. Faker pulls out a brochure for some health food pyramid scheme. As I'm trying to cut him off and explain that I can't afford to pay attention, he blurts out, "But I only need $25,000, 50% return guaranteed." Left him standing outside the restaurant. If I had 25k, I wouldn't be spending it on health food. In my early teens, one of my best friends had the same name as me all the way down to our parents using the same cute as E shortening of it. We spent a lot of time on bicycles, both BMX and mountain, and were usually up to some pretty dangerous shit. One day, shortly after getting speedometers, they was all the rage. We were trying to test our top speeds down this nice, soft winding, but very downhill stretch of road in his neighborhood. Homeboy's pulling away from me, and my sheet said I was doing like 48 miles per hour. Some cat runs a stop sign and hits him so hard that when he tried for the hit and run action, he couldn't get anywhere cause the bike was just twisted and wrapped all around his wheel. My buddy was pretty banged up, bitter of a concussion, some next level road rash, but fairly unhurt considering the potential. For a solid week my phone, my clear Conair joined with the neon in Just to date myself a bit lol. Was just blowing up with people freaking out with variations of 3 basic concerns. Oh my god, I heard you were dead. Point is Mrs. Mom there. We wanna know the funeral details. I heard what happened. You can still live a very happy life in a chair. Not only was it not me that took the hit from the car, but dude was back on the pedals like 2 weeks later. This isn't a rumor I heard about myself, but rather accidentally started. A friend of mine had just broken up with one of these short, few week relationships that you have in high school. Me being the little sheet of a teenage boy decided to tell my buds at my lunch table that they broke up because he had a dick shaped like a boot. Like a literal 90-degree bend in his dick. I figured something like that was so stupid and would just be a good laugh for our close friends at the table. Well, it fucking exploded in the school. It was getting carved into desks, drawn on whiteboards in between classes, whispered about everywhere. This happened for 3 fucking years. Obviously I was super sorry to the dude, apologizing pretty frequently, but it definitely never went away, only faded more and more into obscurity. I remember one time, 2 years after I had said it, he and I were working on our computers in class, facing away from the whiteboard, and he turns around to see a giant faking boot penis drawn on the board. The dude turns to me with a dead face. We stare at each other for a few seconds, and we both go back to work without an exchange of words. Something I'll always regret. In high school, drawing dicks was widely popular because of the Superbad movie. Kids were drawing them on everything and making crazy designs. This one friend I had, Joe, was an absolute wizard at drawing dicks, and I suppose drawing in general. I'd ask Joe to draw me various pictures, mostly containing dicks somewhere in the picture. Girls in the school began to get offended by all the drawings circulating around. So the school began to crack down on dick draws. Fast forward to my Spanish class. We're taking a test. At the end of the test, we hand our papers to a student sitting close by to grade 1 and others' tests, then hand the test to the teacher. Joe has my test. Joe is still an absolute wizard at drawing very realistic dicks. He draws the most detailed, lifelike bonus drawing I've ever seen directly on my test. I didn't know he had done this. Before I had a chance to see my test, they were all collected. Few days pass, and I'm invited to the dean's office. They put the test on the table and accuse me of drawing it. I fess up to drawing it, because Joe is a good friend, and I had my own honor code in high school. Dean calls my parents. Shows my parents the drawing. My parents are pissed. They ground me for a while. Christmas rolls around a few months later. In my stocking, I get a legit artist/drawing set. Although they were faking pissed I drew the business on my test, they commended my artistic ability and bought all sorts of sheet for me to draw/paint. I can't draw worth a sheet. I'm horrible at it. So I never said anything, just rolled with it. Years later, 28 now, my parents still tell my family, friends, and girlfriend that I'm a talented artist and can draw very well. They pushed me towards a graphic design/art degree in school. I didn't do either, but to this day they still tell people that I'm an artist. I started aviation school when I was about 22 and was still doing chemo once a month. I was diagnosed with all when I was 20 and was at the last stage of treatment, so it wasn't too bad. I would do chemo during the day and go to the night class so I wouldn't miss any time. The way the chemo was administered was through a needle on the side of my hand, usually by the wrist bone. When I was done with treatment they would bandage my wrist up, so it looked like an injury if you didn't know why the bandage was there. So I would go straight to night class, which starts at 500, and get there at about 7 showing up with one bandaged wrist. I didn't know any of the night people at first, but since I would go every month I got to know them. 1 or 2 people would ask about why I was there and the bandage, and I told them, but that was it. So fast forward 2 years later I'm riding around, smoking with a now good friend from night class, and he told me that some guy had told people I cut myself and that's what everyone thought. Haha. Bonus story, when I was 14 I had not 1, but 2 girls saying they had sex with me when it wasn't true. Granted one was a slut, but still haha, it was kinda cool. The second girl's boyfriend had his friend confront me. He told me something along the lines of it better not be true and stay away. I just looked around like what the fuck is this real, and said okay haha dude was like 4, 10, 5, 2 at maximum. So it's late sophomore year of high school, and I'm doing my normal everyday thing of trying to blend in and be as forgettable as possible, because I was bullied by a number of my peers years prior. I was very quiet and pretty boring as far as your average high schooler would think. I mostly kept to myself with my small group of friends, and that was peachy. One day during lunch, one of my friends mentioned to me that there was a rumor going around that I had gone to a party, got really drunk, and cheated on my boyfriend by faking a guy on the kitchen table while people watched. I was speechless, and my friend was like, I know, right? 1. I didn't get invited to parties, and even if I did, I would have never gone to. I didn't drink at all. 3. I was a virgin. And 4. I did not have a boyfriend at the time to cheat on in the first place. I asked him where he'd heard it, and I followed the grapevine to find the source. It took me a couple of days. In the meantime, a few random people asked me about it, or made snarky remarks, and eventually got to one of the popular guys in my grade that I have never had a class with. I asked him about it, and he said that he'd been there to see it firsthand. I asked for this girl's name, and sure enough, he said mine. I told him that was my name, and his dumbfounded response was just, oh, that wasn't you. Then he described her to me, and then it clicked. It was a case of mistaken identity with my ex-best friend. We had a falling out over the summer because she had started straying towards a pretty dark path and didn't like that I was telling her what to do, so we just stopped hanging out / talking. She started skipping school thanks to the influence of the sheethead boyfriend that she apparently cheated on, so she wasn't around for people to associate a name with. Prior to her shift of character, we were basically joined at the hip and had a lot of classes together, so I guess somebody vaguely remembered one of our names and it just kinda got out of hand. At that point, the rumor had spread out far enough that it couldn't really be contained. There were roughly 1,200 kids that went to my high school, and of course juicy drama like that spreads like wildfire, so I had no real choice but to wait it out. Thankfully that didn't take long, because once people started realizing that I didn't even come close to fitting the bill, they just kinda dropped it. No real harm came from it, except for one guy in the grade above mine that asked if I'd give him a blowjob, which was a thing. I've been wearing makeup almost every day since I was 15. For most of that time, often people who never wore makeup, would constantly tell me how bad it looked. You didn't do this right. You didn't do that right. It's too much. You look too pale. Why don't you use bare minerals? You're damaging your skin. Blah blah blah. Constantly, for years on end. I'm now 33 and it still hasn't stopped. I have had a makeup artist, a cosmetic dermatologist, and a clinique lady all compliment me on how good it looked, and none of them were selling me anything. But of course, the negativity digs the deepest point anyway. Back in college, I remember getting a knock on my door one day. I opened the door to a girl I had never seen before. Basically, there was a fashion show, or dance of some kind, and she wanted help with her makeup. She came to me because she heard I was good with makeup. I was beyond flattered and over the moon that she thought that. There was a rumor going around that I was good at makeup. I ended up doing what I could with what few drugstore products I had in my arsenal. I was limited with what I could do, but she seemed really happy with it. She came back a few days later and told me that everyone was complimenting her makeup all night. It just made my whole day. In 6th grade, I moved about an hour away from the town where I went to elementary school. Since that was the 90s, social media /email/im didn't exist yet. I stayed in touch with old friends for a bit, but after a year or so, we drifted apart. Then several years later, when MySpace became popular, I happened to see one of my friends pop up. Of course, I friended her and sent a message asking what she's been up to. No reply. A week or two later, a different elementary school friend messaged me and asked me if I was really the Khmereep 729 that went to school in Town Point. Apparently they had tried to Google me and saw a news article for someone of a similar name/age that had died in a car accident in a neighboring state. Think Mary Alson, age 14 versus Mary Alson, aged 13. Since they were in middle school, they didn't realize that there would be an obituary and write-up in the local paper if it had actually been me. They just assumed, grieved, and moved on with their lives after confirming that I was actually alive. I reconnected with about 5 of them. We made plans to meet for pizza in a town about halfway between us. After that, I don't think I saw or talked to any of them again. I went to smoke some weed at lunch with some friends in high school. I was parked on campus with the weed in my truck. As I was in line trying to leave the campus parking lot, a school supervisor came to check if we had our off-grounds passes. As she stuck her head into the window, she got a big ol' whiff of my Cali fire. She immediately says, "I can smell the pot, pull over to the side and we are going to search you." All of our hearts drop instantly. However, she tells my friends to exit the car while I park it somewhere they can search. As my friends get out, she turns her head to talk to one of them. In this split-second moment, instincts took over, and I grabbed my stash and chucked it out my window as far as I could point. An hour of having my car searched by police turned up some minuscule amounts of weed from my floor and some ashes. They start to question me, and I immediately begin lying. "So we found some weed residue and ashes in your car. Care to explain?" "Well, officer, I share my car with my 25-year-old brother. I honestly have no clue what that is. It's probably my brother's." Cop kind of understood and was like, "Well, it's not really enough to charge you with anything, but you have to tell your brother not to smoke blah blah blah." After I convinced him that was true, he gave me a field sobriety test, checked my eyes, and looked in my mouth, and he goes, "What's this white stuff on your tongue?" I had horrible cotton mouth from smoking earlier. I don't know, probably plaque or some sheet plaque. Yup, plaque. I've been eating all day. Eventually he let me go, but was a bit skeptical about it all. Then as the day progressed, I started getting texts from everyone in school. Even people I didn't know were texting me, "Dude, is it true you got caught with weed?" To my close friends I responded, kind of, "They didn't find anything and let me go." "How did they not find anything?" "Everyone's saying you got caught with 10 pounds of weed for one whole week." I was the kid that hid 10 pounds of weed from cops and got away with it. Was pretty awesome, to be honest. Zero trouble and got a lot of attention from the cool girls. TLDR, schoolyard duty, smelled weed in my car. I threw it out my window while they weren't looking. Rumors spread. I apparently hid 10 pounds from cops and got away with it. A year after finishing high school, younger people and teachers thought that I'm already married. 20 years back then, I was married, but already divorced. I joined military special forces because my body is stress resistant. I went to Iraq/Afghanistan with military. I died in Iraq/Afghanistan. Few really nice girls cried. I own a business. I own very successfully business. And everyone should go to me for an internship. I'm nice, dude. I'm Satanist. I am performing dark rituals and I keep sacrificial stuff under my bed. So yeah, I was legend after high school. Satanic special forces operative, divorced and successful business owner, presumably dead. Whenever I go there are after some time rumors that I know everybody, I know everything. I'm just nice and I like to talk to people. I have no idea what I'm doing. And I know only by name like 1% of people who know my name. I don't know how that happened. So through my life is, "Hey Veer 284, hey, you, how are you?" Some rambling about stuff, mentioning people I know or I don't. Good talking, oh man, thanks. By the way, would you like to be my best man on my wedding/godfather to my kids/my business partner/life partner etc. What the hell?